My Lords, I'm encouraged to see so many of your Lordships joining this debate. Government procurement is an important issue. After all, it is we, the taxpayers' money that is being spent every day, and I think we have a right to ensure that we are getting good value. Before I move on, I'd like to state that pursuant to the Code of Conduct, I have registered with the Table Office any relevant interest that may arise from those listed in my name in the House Register of Interest. Government expenditure was in the region of $238 billion on procurement in the last year. I believe this was spent on a whole range of items and services, from, say, paper clips right up to guided missiles. Now, by referring to getting good value for money, I would like to break this down into three categories. The first and most obvious being that best prices should be obtained for any product or service required by government. The second refers to value for the country, and the third, value for SMEs. Now, starting with real value for money, your Lordships will agree with me that the world has moved on considerably as far as internet connectivity is concerned, and for that reason I believe there is simply no longer the need for local purchasing. Centralised purchasing should be implemented immediately. Now, I regret to say, from my experience in running so many businesses, that when you place the task of procurement in the hands of unqualified people, it's similar in some cases to letting kids run riot in a sweet shop. The main issue is, of course, that it's not their money, and it's amazing how irresponsible some people can be when spending other people's money as opposed to their own, obviously stating the obvious there. In August 2010, Sir Philip Green was asked by the Prime Minister to carry out an efficiency review. He published his findings in October 2010. The report spoke of inefficiency and waste of government spending. One of the observations was that it was impossible for the civil service to operate efficiently with current processes in place. Expensive IT contracts were contracted for too long with no flexibility. There was no motivation to save money or to treat cash as your own, the point I made just before. There was no process for setting and challenging detailed departmental budgets, and most importantly, there are inconsistent commercial skills across the departments. The report gave some factual examples where there were variations of up to 80% across central departments in prices paid for the same product. Now, for a commercial person like me, these issues are very easy to resolve, and what I'm about to suggest will be controversial, but very commercial. My assumption is based on the fact that a centralised group of real procurement professionals purchasing the same goods and services obtained, say, for the past $238 billion spent, would have been able to procure, in my opinion, the exact amount of goods for, say, $200 billion. I'm, of course, putting to one side the fact that maybe a lot of the stuff should never have been ordered in the first place, but that is another story. It is here that the controversial issue arises, and I say there is definitely a need to recruit professionals from the private industry and offer not only an exciting challenge, but more importantly, they should be able to earn what they can earn in the commercial world, as well as bonus targets. Now, these people in turn would have to employ others, and this new group should then be responsible for training existing public sector staff to deal with business effectively to get the best possible value for money for the public purse. Now, hypothetically, and I'm just dreaming here, if this group of procurement experts I refer to, say, costs £50 million a year, that pales into insignificance against the saving of my forecasted $38 billion given in the example. The reason I say it's controversial is it's down to the question of this. Would the government have the guts to do this, or would they be frightened off by the headlines about the head honcho in charge of procurement earning X millions of pounds a year? I mean, one can see a certain national newspaper now with the headlines of Fred Smith earns X million pounds a year while Joe Bloggs in the northeast of England struggles. Of course, my example of that newspaper would not be interested in the 38 billion that is being saved, but that's not good headlines. So I ask the government to consider the implementation of this idea and rise above the inevitable external criticism and do the sensible commercial thing. Now, moving on to my second point, value for the country. So many government contracts are awarded to foreign companies or companies that pay little or no tax in this country. Now, I know we're all fully aware of the requirements under the EU rules and regulations on procurement, but I'm sure your lordships won't be surprised when I cite our cousins in France, who seem to magically manage to be very patriotic when it comes to dishing out orders from the government. Now, there are examples of ECJ rulings which have allowed for European countries to widen the criteria for what they see as the most economically advantageous tender, or more commonly known as meat. And it shouldn't be based upon just price alone. Now, both France and the Netherlands have used this and to include it for environmental and social benefits. In the year 2000, the French Republic was taken to court by the European Commission for failing to comply with European procurement legislation. The case referred to a construction and maintenance of school buildings. The European Commission's main objective was the use of an award criteria which required contractors to recruit local workers from a project to specifically combat unemployment. Well, the ECJ defended the French and ruled that a contracting authority can use the fight against unemployment as award criteria. And dare I say, perhaps this could have been used in the recent Bombardier case, where maybe 1,400 jobs in Derby could have been saved. Instead, the decision was made that the train carriages would be produced in Germany. Now, this is where I think this government could learn some serious lessons from our European counterparts. Because I'm sorry to say, but if I was in charge of procurement, I would have fought tooth and nail to keep that Bombardier deal in this country. Now, when it comes to government procurement of information and technology products, many of us will have noticed in government offices, hospitals and other government-run establishments that the desks are littered in many cases with computer equipment made by a certain Japanese and German partnership. Now, there's a funny story here, my lords, because some of you may recall a British computer company who may remember the name ICL, which was Britain's equivalent to IBM many years ago. Well, they eventually got sold to a Japanese company who in turn associated themselves with a famous German company. The government many years ago quite rightly awarded a lot of its IT business to ICL, a British company. That made sense. However, your lordships may be interested to hear that the government is still entrenched in contracts dating back years ago, originating with the ICL company, but are now enjoyed by this foreign entity. It's what I call grandfathered-in contracts. There has been a total lack of flexibility in using and assessing other supply chains. Now, I apologise here for raising the conflict of interest issue again, but I do so merely as a demonstration of what is going on. Like many other people, have one of the few computer companies that still produces computers in this country, and we do indeed supply certain government-run organisations and schools, and we employ about 200 people. And as I say, I'm typical of many other companies in this country. And so I'd just like to make it perfectly clear that I am not touting for business here, but merely using this as a demonstration. to show the scale of what I'm talking about. If, for example, we were awarded a tenth of the computer and IT system services that the government purchased throughout the course of the year, I would have to employ at least 350 to 400 more people. I've made this point clear to those involved in procurement, but it seems the penny still has not dropped. And as I say, my example is most probably not unique, and I'm sure the same could be expressed by people in other industries. Now, I'm certainly not advocating that the government should pay more for British assembled products. The process of winning government contracts still has very strict criteria on price, quality and delivery, but the priorities are wrong. And if you took my example of employing another 300 to 400 people, thus removing the government burden of having to look after some of those people in the unemployment benefit system, it would outweigh some of the minor additional costs that may have to be paid to smaller companies trying to compete with the giant foreign organisations who simply dump product in Britain. And let me share one point with your Lordships, the fact that my IT company is inundated with inquiries from young school leavers requesting for work experience, wanting to get into the IT field. We simply can't take them on. We have no work for them. Even if there are apprenticeship schemes available or other allowances, there simply comes a point where the company has to face the harsh commercial reality. The government must support British companies and find a way to make the procurement process work for the country, like the French and the other European countries have done. The most economically advantageous deal may not always be about the cheapest price. There are wider social impacts to consider, and this is about what government should be doing to support jobs and our UK businesses. Now, the third and final element of value for money relates to SMEs, the small to medium-sized enterprises from whom I heard the government say when they were elected that they were going to try to ensure that at least 25% of contracts were awarded to SMEs. Now, to date, I understand that figure is about 7%, but there seems to be another 25% rule, and that is that an SME can't bid for a contract if its value is more than 25% of its turnover. Now, this seems crazy to me. This SME, for example, may be the market leader in the field, yet the contract has to be placed with larger companies that do not have the same expertise. The government says that it's angry with the banks for not lending to small to medium-sized enterprises. Well, they can encourage such lending by making sure that orders are given to small to medium-sized enterprises so as to impress the banks into lending the money. When government contracts are handed out, for example, to large organisations, there should be clauses in those contracts which clearly state they must give a certain percentage of the contract out to British SME subcontractors. Now, I'm sure the Minister will advise your Lordship's House that many of the points that I have raised here are already under control and that I should not despair. Indeed, I am aware that quite coincidentally to the date of this debate, the Right Honourable Minister of the Cabinet Office held an event on the 21st of November titled A New Way Forward. The agenda showed that the government had acknowledged many of the things that I had raised today, particularly in respect to IT, and as example it says, and I quote, "For businesses to understand the government's intention to will move away from large projects that are slow to implement or pose a greater risk of failure, and to end the oligopoly of large suppliers that monopolise its service provision." Well, that's fighting talk and exactly what we would like to hear. And I have had the good fortune to meet some senior civil servants from the Cabinet Office who have politely debated these issues with me. And I will say that I'm somewhat impressed with the approach that they claim to be taking today. But they must also be the first to acknowledge that these plans will not be achieved with the greatest respect with those currently in place who are responsible for procurement. This government needs to engage serious professionals, centralise its procurement process and get a genuinely better deal for SMEs in the UK. My Lords, I've opened a whole host of topics upon which I'm sure your Lordships participating in this debate will add to, and I await with interest the comments of the speakers following. I beg to move.